way endorsing anything that, current suffering or people who are dying involuntarily. So this is discussions about a voluntary kind of existence. And it's only, and so if we're talking about the other things, then I would have a very different sort of conversation where fighting for life is important. So I want to just say that right up front so there's no confusion. And we can talk about that later too. So what I've done for today is I've sent you two very short texts. I want to say a little bit about each of them. And there are two kind of textual, what I would call provocations. I think I said that in my email, but they're provocations from the Western intellectual tradition, for what that's worth. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. But one of them is from ancient Greece. It's about 2,500 years ago. It's a writing by Plato about the life of a philosopher. And the second is from 19th century Europe, a Danish scholar writing about kind of a totalizing social existence and very critical of kind of a totalizing sociality, etc. And so those are the two kind of voices I want to just raise and give voice to in the conversation. And I'll say a few things about these individually. And once I've done that, we'll talk amongst ourselves about what we think of this, what's going on, and what do we want to make of it in our own kind of conversation in life. So let me just read, turning to the ancient Greek one, a little piece from the Phaedo, and I'm just going to read like a couple of lines from it to kind of orient us to this conversation. Plato's telling the story of Socrates' death. Socrates accused of corrupting the youth. And this is probably a familiar story to many of you. But if it isn't, it's pretty simple. Socrates is kind of challenging ancient Greek ways of thinking. And he wants individuals to question whatever they've been fed by adults, essentially by Greek authorities. And so he asks questions about what is justice? When we say justice, what are we talking about, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things he says then when he's condemned to death is this, and I'm just going to read just a brief line here from this reading. He says, I'm afraid that other people do not realize that the one aim of those who practice philosophy in the proper manner, is to practice for dying and death. And so what he wants to demonstrate is that philosophy understood properly is the practice of dying. And so, and what he means by that is essentially determining one's life in ways that aren't beholden to one's feelings, one's preferences, external drives, things like that. And so what he's trying to orient his followers in many ways is to living a life that's fundamentally not driven externally, but driven internally. And that has led to, and does lead to, in fact, his death. And so philosophy then for him is the practice of dying. And that kind of thought and that idea has a long history in the Western intellectual tradition. And we could talk certainly more about that. The other piece is from Soren Kirkegaard, 19th century philosopher, one of the sharpest critical minds, I think, I tend to appreciate his thought in all kinds of ways for all kinds of reasons, mostly because he's largely critical in a variety of ways. But he's fighting against a kind of totalitarian thinking where society, the ethical life of society is always right. And what he wants to argue is, and he's speaking, and Kierkegaard's speaking from a Christian perspective, or at least a faith perspective, and says, well, faith is actually individual. And so for him to be faithful is to die to the world and to be prepared to die to the world. Now, to be a critical Christian in the 19th century of Europe means not like you're going to literally die, but it leads to social isolation, exclusion, and marginalization. And he accepts that entirely as what it means to be faithful in a very loosest sense of being faithful. It's internalized, it's driven by inward kind of orientation. And out of that, then one can see the world rightly and care for the world rightly in the way that our society often can't. And so particularly in the emerging, very modern world, he argues that you have to basically step outside the values of society. And it's only in doing that can you actually be authentic, to use kind of a much more kind of popular language. And so I know that there are analogs to this in a lot of other intellectual and religious traditions. And so I wanted to just raise this question to set the table in this way, and then move towards a conversation where we might want to identify kind of in our own experiences where this might be true, and in our own experiences where we may not think this is true, and what we might want to learn from this and hold it still at a critical distance. So that's a long kind of introductory set of comments to this conversation. But what I want to say, just to open the discussion then, is to ask something like this. Do we think it's right to say something like this? The good life, or the thoughtful life, is the practice of dying. What do we make of that comment, both kind of as we try to make sense of it kind of in our heads, but also in our lives? And so maybe that's the best way to kind of open a discussion, to raise a few questions and see what you think, and whether that makes any sense with your own existence or not. Nirmal, is that fair to kind of begin like that?
Yes.
Paul, can you come up with that the question again?
Sure. And now it's going to be a totally different question. Watch this. What I want to ask is this: is it right to think of the good life, or the moral life, or the responsible life as the practice of dying? It's a simple yes or no, and then if you answer yes or no, then you have to explain why you answer yes or no.
Can I say something? Can I answer that question?
Please. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Shens. So my answer to that question is I might say yes, because like in the process of like going towards death, and also when you're near to death, you start to think about the things that you've done in the past. So when you actually practice the moral life, so-called like doing good things in this world, then you don't bring so much regret when you die. That's what I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Shens. That's great. Any other thoughts? Anybody agree that yes, this is the right way to think of it?
Can I add? My name is Amalina. So I'm with Stan as well. So for me, leading a moral life is kind of a preparation toward that we are prepare ourselves to be dying one day. So instead of dying without doing nothing to the society or even our parents as a close one, so we still want to actually benefit people from our life. So yeah, yes from my end.
Hi, Hokkien here. For me also yes. It is as if like, live life to the fullest, because that, as if that we are living today as if that is the last day of our life. When we think of that, it's like, we will try our best to do our best in every day. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Does anyone want to argue the other side? Does anyone want to say no? This is a problematic way of seeing life.
Am I also allowed to say something?
Please.
Yeah, I actually have always asked that question to myself, like, what is moral? Something moral for me may not be moral for the other being. Something good for me may not be good for the other being. Because if we see, let's say, a cat eating a mouse, now are we going to save the mouse and let the cat starve? What is moral here? And it's very subjective. So that has always been a question to me. Let's say an example, somebody might say I look so beautiful, but go and ask it to someone that, who might just hate me. So it's very subjective, I think. So it's a question that I am not really sure.
That's a good observation. And what I would also want to say is Kierkegaard is the one who kind of always says, and we can certainly talk about this as well, but Kierkegaard would always say, truth is subjectivity. And what he meant by that is something like truth has to be internalized for it to really be true. Truth has to be lived by subjects, namely people, for it to be true. Because an idea, well, what is that other than merely an idea? So that's too simply to say you're certainly in the right, asking all the right questions in relation to these sorts of questions. That's very good. Ray, did you want to comment as well?
Yes, I'm actually for a yes, but just for the sake of playing the devil's advocate, I could try a no. Well, honestly, it goes both ways because yes, I believe that it's a constant dying to the immediate things. Not that these are not good, but then honestly, if we are too much awake, sometimes if we care too much, if it's a constant dying, it's actually very exhausting there. And then yeah, sometimes I think this can
Ray, we lost your voice.
in that particular context. Otherwise, it's a yes for me. That yes, we ought to die in a sense in order to live.
Excellent. Thank you, Marnie. Why don't you add too? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually quite conflicted in answering to choosing just one answer with whether it's a yes or a no, because well, I'm a Christian also, and I believe that there are some aspects in our lives that we need to die from, and I think I would like to frame it as growth. That a good moral life involves a lot of living and also dying. So I don't like to set like a binary perspective on a good life is really more like dying than living. So that's my concept.
Excellent. No, that's wonderful. So what I want to push you all then, all of you who said yes, you're incredibly well intentioned, and that's a wonderful answer. Except for this. Now I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a moment. So here's a very common criticism, and I think a very good criticism that's possible with the kind of this position in a certain sense. What Plato wants is to prioritize is one's soul over one's body. And I think in this version of reality that Plato is talking about, the soul always is more important than the body. And in one sense, one can really intellectualize life then. The life of the mind or the soul is all that really matters. And the life of one's body is, well, give or take, who cares? And this has historically led to some, well, deep problems, and is, I think, also tied indirectly, no doubt, but certainly tied to the ways in which we can treat the earth as if it doesn't really matter. Or other people as if they don't really matter. Because if I'm living like I'm going to die today and I don't have to worry about tomorrow, one thought I probably should have before I go all out there is, well, are my kids going to have enough food tomorrow, or do I not care? Does it matter? And I hope I'm a good enough parent to say, well, I probably should care about that a little bit. So there's a sense in which all of you who said yes, you're probably right, but maybe you're also wrong. What do we make of the kind of the effects or the entailments of holding this in a strong way? Or does that not cause any problems for us as we think about this?
Could you repeat the question again?
Sure. Yeah, please. I know I talk fast and I slur like a Canadian, well, because I am. But what I want to say is something like this. Yes, no doubt there is some deep truth here in terms of what Plato's articulating here. But is he also right in highlighting or in refusing to acknowledge the real importance of material existence? Or are there parts of material existence and our responsibilities and our place in life that we ought not to think about dying to live as kind of the orientation to what we ought to do? Come on, does that make sense?
Prof. Paul, could I? Actually, I think what I come from the perspective of enjoying ecofeminism. So, and yeah, and I believe that is true. There is actually really a problematic aspect in terms of like, especially with how Plato is about, you know, how he, but he's actually more than a dualist per se. But then at certain levels, especially with how he values the mind over the visceral senses of the body, is also something that is also hurtful, because we are really a composite of, and even that of the environment. So there is definitely something there. I think it's more of our presence, where we choose to be there. I mean, it doesn't sound like a direct answer, but yes, because otherwise, if we were to compartmentalize everything so neatly, then it will be to our downfall. We do it every time in terms of sciences and even in terms of theology, like how we back up people in leadership, despite us supposedly being, you know, Muslims or Christians or Buddhists who believe in good, or even the atheist who believes in, you know, humanism. We compartmentalize too much.
Yeah, Ray, you put your finger on what's deeply problematic in Plato's form of this is it is a dualism. And it's only by kind of being willing to give up the body that one can be pure in some sense, or be moral, or to live the good life. And I'm not sure that really is, that sells much anymore. What do we make of that?
Prof. Martin, can I make a
Please,
short
and
comment?
jump in
I think
anytime.
Yeah, for me, Plato's life of the mind, or what do you call it, soul over body paradigm is it entails a person to be a hippie or a neo-hippie. Yeah, and this has been done in practical ways, and there are small models of this all over the world, where people try to make micro worlds that are of the soul over the body. That's just a short comment from me.
Yeah, so nobody wants to be a hippie anymore. Is that what I heard? Good. Well,
there are hippies, but they don't call them hippies these days.
Well, that's true. That is very true. Good. Well, let's put that on hold for a moment. And now I want to talk a little bit about the Fear and Trembling piece that Kierkegaard wrote. And I want to introduce a way in which I think he tries to engage the dualism and the kind of rejection of material life in a certain way. So for Kierkegaard, he's working against a totalizing society. And what he wants to say is, yes, of course, you have to let the authority and the power of that die. But in its place, it's not nothing. And so he knows Socrates well, and he rejects that kind of dualistic view where it's only this or only that. And what he wants to argue is, and after you give it up, you have to be willing to accept life back as a gift. And so when you give it up, you then treat it, your life, all of your life, in terms of your own, your physical life, people, the physical world. You treat these then as gifts, because you no longer control them. You no longer set the parameters for them. You use them then in ways that are, how should we say, non-consumptive, you know, in the broadest sense. Do we like that solution or that that concluding comment when we say die into the world? Are we willing to allow that version of getting the world back as helpful? Eric, what do you think? Sorry, I haven't bothered you yet. So does it, does that make any sense to you? What do you think?
May I say something?
Yeah.
So that's Marnie.
Okay, Marnie, it's okay. You go first.
Yeah. I would agree with what you said, like on the last set of statements, that we need to die of something in order to go back to the world, in order not to be out of touch also. I would always go back to that expression or concept that we need to be people in the world and with the world, but not necessarily of the world. So we do not allow the world to consume us or to even define who we are, but we need to journey with it. So that involves a lot of aspects, the temporal ones, the material ones, and even the spiritual. So, but Plato, I think Plato emphasized also the value of self-introspection, so that when we go back to the world or when we journey with the world, we are able we are able to keep our identity without losing ourselves, but able to address certain concerns or certain problems in the world and with the world.
Nat, please, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that we are now talking about Plato and his way of presenting this, but if you could also combine that understanding in the light of your own personal experience, it will give, otherwise this discussion will become a discussion on Plato. And that's not the intention. Well, we need to know who Plato is and many others, but maybe like money, when you talked about what would it be possible that you can see the light of your own experience, your own questions, queries?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I thought we were going to get there yet eventually, but we're happy to jump there at any time. What I guess in my own experience, I mean, there's two kind of, one fairly mundane kind of way for that helps me think about some of these things, and one a little more dramatic way kind of experience that kind of helps to in my life helps me make sense of this. And not so much Plato's version. I think Plato's version is actually not very helpful. It's a provocation, but I think you end up losing the world. And the only for Plato's version, the only kind of happy resolution is death. And I'm not really sold on that in terms of, not that I'm scared of dying. Well, I probably am, but that's not, in principle, I'm not scared of dying. But because I think it deeply denigrates the material world and people and relationships and all of these other things that I think are really important. So I think Kierkegaard is a very helpful way to kind of think about then these other sorts of things. And I'll give you just two examples. I don't know how old you are, and I don't know if those of you who are old enough have kids, but I would say something like this. There comes a time as a parent, and this is the mundane example, and I'll give a more dramatic one later. But there comes a time as a parent where you just have to let your kids go. And there's a sense in which you just have to put to death whatever controls you still want to have on their life. And then you take their life back as a gift, as they give it to you, because you no longer control, and there's no way in which any more grasping at control, grasping at making that something other than it is, helps. And so there's a sense that you very much have to you have to let die all of those feelings and intentions, et cetera, that you want for that person, and you let them be on their own, and then you receive them back as they determine their existence. And so there's a sense in which, at a very mundane level, that gets to what Kierkegaard is on about. You just have to give up managing the world according to your own criteria or the world's criteria, and you're going to get back things that don't fit, that you don't expect, and you receive them as a gift, and that's all you can do. So that's a super mundane example. A much more dramatic example would be something like when my wife, we have twins, and so when my wife was giving birth to the twins, lots of complications, almost died for like probably a week there. We're not sure if any of this was going to happen, or whether she was going to make it or the kids were going to make it. And so in my own life, this is a kind of a classic example of, well, you just have to accept what is, and in a very real way, and you have to let whatever hopes and dreams that you expected for life, you have to let those all go. And so there's a sense in a very Kierkegaardian sense, you resign to giving up all of that. And then, well, she did live, and the twins did live. And so when you get that back, you receive it as a gift that you don't deserve. And there's no kind of economic or mathematical sense in which A before equals B after. But you then live in a way of kind of deep appreciation and reception for things that you no longer and you have a right understanding of your lack of control, and in all of these things, and you simply accept as gift and treat as gift the things that you're given. And so there's ways in which one can think about this. Money is clearly one. Environmental sort of ecological concerns are clearly another. But those are two examples kind of in my life, a very kind of simple one and a little more kind of complicated one, of the kind of letting die things that probably ought not to run your life. Now, does that help kind of from clarify, kind of extrapolate from my own kind of context what how this is kind of helpful to maturing, I think, subjectively, if we want to use that language. And so my question for all of you is, and as we kind of think about these things, is can you think of in your own life kind of analogs or examples that kind of follow this pattern, that have been kind of important and in kind of normative ways? Or are there ways in which your experience suggests that this way of thinking is actually problematic and wrong? And this is kind of an open forum where you can raise those sorts of questions or have those sorts of kind of dispositions.
Maybe if I can say something.
Please.
There's I don't know whether to call it a notion or a say. People sometimes do say that you enjoy the life as if there is no tomorrow. So in a sense that people don't think about what will come tomorrow, and you find that this notion has misled a lot of people in such a way that to bring the concept of having a children, you find yourself, let's say you are earning like 50,000 every month. Then this 50,000, you go and party with it, all of it, as if you don't care about tomorrow. And tomorrow here is the concept of when you die today, what kind of a life is your children going to live? Are they going to live in the street? Or are they going to be beggars forever because you are enjoying your own life, thinking that saving the materialistic is not part of happiness in life? So for me, I think this thing of dying to live, from my perspective, is I can put it in such a way that you die empty, in such a way that you fulfilled and prepare the foundation to the generation to come. That is your children and everybody that will take your position. Because when somebody died in a family, that gap will never be refilled again. Or it can be refilled with the newborn, but the characters and how this person was helpful to these people will take years and years to be noticed. So I think if somebody wants to rule out the materialistic part of it, is important as also in our life, because what's a happy life nowadays? When you look at it deeply, happy life is all about how much you have, how wealthy you are. Money rules the world. So we can't really rule out the materialistic part of it, just concentrating on in our soul. If you take into the perspective of religion, you find that nowadays some people have turned the religion as an entrepreneur for them. People start churches to make money. So I think more of the mind nowadays is more about the materialistic, and you fulfill whatever goals and dreams you wanted in the world. So if you died after fulfilling all those kind of goals and dreams, then you died empty, dying feeling happy that you have achieved whatever the purpose you brought into this world. So I think that's my perspective about it.
Eric's sharing reminds me about 2 words: be present. Because because especially for Chinese, I mean Asian Chinese, always think of like how to work hard, accumulate more wealth for the next generation. But because of the busy times, they are not present to their life where they're supposed to enjoy it. So at the same time that when come to the separation or like the life and death, they are into the sadness that again they are not present because that they because of how they feel it, they end up they sort of like discard the rest of the people that who's still alive. So it's always live in regret. So that's why that when Eric or the most of you was sharing, right, it's really towards how to be present and in what we are doing now. I think this is the most precious that that I feel. Thank you so much.
No, that's great. And so those are both excellent comments, and that's exactly right. And I think that the metaphor of death and dying is not so much death and dying in our world today, although it is that in some places. But for most of us, it's kind of metaphor of existence. And another way to talk about it is, and I hate talking about it like this too, but what does it cost you to be present? And I hate to monetize it because the kind of economic way of thinking about everything is kind of so infected our life that it's deeply problematic. But to be present has costs, shall we say, both in the present and in the future. And how do we think of those costs? And how much are we willing to give up to be present? Tam, what do you think?
Sir, say for example, my commitment to live as a feminist, since I'm brought up, or most of us are really brought up in a patriarchal society, and the commitment to stay and to live as a feminist would entail a lot of sacrifices, for one. So that means in terms of my work, it would define what books I will have to read, what books or materials would I have to give to my students in my theology classes. It would entail also arguing perhaps, or even fighting with certain practices which are misogynistic and and very patriarchal, going against sometimes with your parents who are also brought up in a very patriarchal society, or even friends. So it would cost a lot, no, of dying from the usual culture that you have, where you flourish eventually, but then choosing or committing to a new one would entail a lot of sacrifices, and would entail a lot of courage even, no, to be committed to it. So siguro that's an example that I would share to the group.
Marnie, that's an excellent example. And the language Kierkegaard eventually adopts is essentially sacrifice or even martyrdom. To be concerned for some of these things that are really important, that the society that we live in doesn't think is important, is in many ways is a kind of, in the language used, is kind of martyr your future, at least according to the prevailing social evaluations. And in many ways, what I suspect is this effort that all of you are making is sacrificing a lot of other things that our society thinks are more important than this. No doubt. And clearly you've embraced this. So in some ways, you're performing precisely the kind of thing that Kierkegaard is talking about. And so I guess what I want to ask you is that how you think of it, or how do you think of it, or are there better ways to think about it than dying to the world? Because that's the language that's come through this tradition. And I think in some ways it's deeply problematic. And so at the end of the day, what I want to hear from you is, what language would you use to best describe the way in which what you're spending your time doing in this fellowship is costing you in the world? Now we can make that a test if you want, but just for our own, sorry, the lights are on a timer here. There we go. But for our own benefit, how do you describe it, or how would you describe it in the best possible way? Nat.
Yes, I mean, just a small footnote. I think this question that you asked, what is the cost of doing this fellowship? Not in terms of material things, but could be also. I think that's a very pertinent question to this exercise, because that's one of the things that I've been trying to share with the fellows. What does it take to do a program like this? What are the sacrifices, irritations, challenges? I think that would be a nice thing too. And what do you have to die, or what are the things in you that has to die to do such a kind of program or such kind of learning journey? I think that would be also very helpful for regenerating some aspects of this program. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, if we were in my seminar here at Baylor, what I'd say is take 3 minutes, write 4 sentences, and then read those 4 sentences. But I assume you're quite capable of remembering, what you think, or how articulating how you think. But and I don't want to go around the Zoom room here and point out, but I'm happy to do so if you want.
I can begin. Well, just an anecdote. I'm 33 years old, and I find the number 33 as very significant to me as a Christian. Traditionally, it's the age that Jesus Christ actually died. And so on my 33rd birthday, I actually asked myself, now, what kind of dying would I have to go through for my 33rd year? And I'm going to my 34th year, and I see the GMF actually as a rebirth. No, it's a reclaiming my truest self. It's dying to my other attitudes, like being procrastinating all the time, and making the different practices here in this fellowship. But say, for example, like diary keeping, it's not something that I do. So it's a rebirth, and it's reclaiming a lot of things, or a lot of values that I tend to forget, because I'm really more into work, and writing, and researching. But this program presents certain kinds of practices and certain yeah, habits that you need to develop in order to be your truest self. So perhaps that's how I would have to connect the two. And I don't like using the word dying because I think I would go for growth. That's one, if I could use another word, it would be growth. But at some point in certain aspects of my life, I would identify certain values that I need to die to. But I would really go for growth.
Marty, that is great. And all of that is perfect. And let me just push back just a smidge. The language of dying is terrible too. Well, for whatever reason. But there's a sense too in which for new growth to happen, even if we're going to talk horticulture here, we're going to talk about plants. In order for new growth, often there needs to be pruning. And so we could use that language if that makes sense, or we like that better, or what do you need to cut out of your life in order to make room for new growth? Because that's really kind of and then you have to, accept that whatever you cut off is what's cut off or cut out of your life. And that's another kind of analog to thinking in this way. That's excellent, excellent. Anybody else want to, Matt? Oh, Hom, why don't I ask you? Sorry, I don't mean to give you a hard time, but fire away.
Doctor, can you, Nat? Yeah, Dr. Nat, you meet.
Come again, Paul?
Yes, hi. Yeah, this is Hom, and I want to share. This is Hom, and I want to share one things that we believe in Buddhism, that we say no mud, no lotus. So there are so many conditions like that cause the dying. For me, what I see dying is not like the physical dying and the last phrase, but I see in our life there are so many phrases of dying. Let's say if I come across with this GMF in last 10 years ago, it won't come to my attention at all because I haven't gone through that much of the deep debt, several debt causing because of the structure in the country, because of the distorted, the violent culture happening in the country. Because in these 10 years of time, not only physically and emotionally, but also there are so many injury happening in the spiritual and in the morality. So because of this moral and spiritual injury has happened a lot as a young person going through in a difficult time in a country. Because of this, so many several that at this point when I come across with this conscious and compassion, and this is like reliving the moment that the hope to live, to continue to live. You need to have this kind of strengths and this kind of support to live. And also I'm looking back to the community, to many community back in Myanmar. So especially the community that displaced community, refugee communities, and we could learn so many. We see that so many dying moments happen to their life, but at the same time, the way they live their life is even more fully and more without facing this kind of dying moments. They have more resilience, and they value the dignity, and they have more respect toward each others. And they are truly living by going through so many phases of dying. So this is what I understand from here. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Come on, yeah, fire away.
Yes, so you were asking about the cost. Actually, the cost basically, I think, is the competition that's going on around in this, materialistic world. That am I equivalent to my friend who is also 33 and already has a car and a house, and I'm still doing this session, sitting on Saturday, not working and not making money, and not fitting into that, economically not being into that category yet. So I think the cost for us is that, but again, the benefit for us definitely is that this is going to make us a better person. And this is something that we are spending the time that we will not be regretting ever. We'll always be very proud of this moment, these learnings and these lessons. So a lot of unlearning actually has to happen for us to reach out to that, before we die. So I think that, yeah.
Well, that's good. And the unlearning here, I mean, as I'm sure you all are finding out, if you haven't already, I'm sure you're very much aware of this. I mean, so at one level, it means not working and making money on Saturday. It's another couple of levels is like, if your parents are still alive, they probably think, why is my kid wasting all the time and energy doing this stuff that, we didn't send them to college, or we don't want them to just, go out and make nothing of their life, shall we say. And so there's all kinds of social consequences, even the ones that wouldn't accumulate money and kind of a future in our own life. And that can hurt as much as, not having the extra the money for working on it on Saturday, for example. And that's what is so difficult in many ways to overcome, much more so than the money piece, I think. And maybe I'm wrong about this in my own life, but in my mind, those are the more challenging things to articulate clearly and helpfully to people who just don't get it. Am I totally wrong about this, or are all of you experiencing this in one way or another as well?
Dr. Paul, may I add? So yeah, talking about that, I think everyone here, doing this fellowship would have the questions, does this fellowship bring you money? So this is the question that keep coming to me when I tell people, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not free on Saturday or Sunday to do, to go shopping during this hour or that time. So they will say, oh, what do you get from this kind of fellowship? What do you get from your masters? What do you get from your kind of study or anything you are doing to the society? And one thing that, just now when Home shared about the dying that we see every day, right? So I would like to say that we are also dying when we live, but instead of being alive in our life. So talking about that, I always think about the contentment of my own life. So there will be a day that I tell God, oh God, I'm ready to die today. So if you want to take my life, you can take anytime from now. But there will be a day that when I feel like, oh, I have loans to pay, I have these kind of things to do, and a long checklist of my life or my day, or maybe within a mind. So I would say that to myself, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not ready to die yet. So I need to settle this, everything here before I die. So for me, dying in life is such a way that we don't want ourselves to be a burden to other people. So this is what I think. So whenever the real death, or we are taking that as analogy or something like that, we just don't want ourselves to be a burden. It's either we live in this world, or we will actually live from this world. So yeah, that's all about it.
That is excellent. And I want to say something now before I forget. And I want to say it again probably later too, because it's really, really important. And then I want to keep listening, but I want to just register this. What you get here in this process that Kierkegaard and Plato could never have imagined is each other. Both of them couldn't imagine this sort of dying to the world sort of process, except in a super highly individual kind of conflictual way with society. And what you have together is infinitely more valuable than they could have imagined in this process. So I just want to register that now before I forget, so that at least, even if Nat's not going to give you money, you at least get each other. Yeah, Kamala, you wanted to come back on that, and then Tan and Hobset, please go in that order, please.
I think we would better give chance to our fellows first. So home.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Home first, and then Hong Tia.
Hi. I just want to share one thing that I think that our co-fellow might related to that is last week for me, I experienced dying during our first encounter sections. It's like for me, I have been learning to get something and learning to walk, and so learning to do something. So this kind of attitudes, this kind of mindset has shaped me until this age of time. And then also like at the first section with Professor Junang, and I started to feel like a deep process of dying and really shudder me down. And I started to feel that this whole week is really relieving experience, the way I see when I pick up the books and read, and the way I see how I observe and how I really deeply observe to understand, and the way how I have a feeling to serve, not feeling to teach or feeling to, to react something, to respond some things. And even the way I see children around me and the way how I observe them. So I feel that talking about the present moment, and it is indeed this whole week, I gain more present moment awareness, and I living really fully. Because of that, the whole section make me die and make me die in a very deeper level. So I would like to share this, please.
Excellent. Excellent.
I wrote a sentence for myself: growing to die, dying to grow. It's like, what Home and also Mani say that, about growing instead of dying. But we are growing every day. But at the end of the day that, we're going to die. But there are few phases that, die doesn't mean that it's physically, but, the obstacles that we're facing, and it can be spiritual dying or, anything. So, but after that, after the dying will be another growing. I had this encounter with my good friends recently, who I think I mentioned before that, who had a serious depression. And he was like, he wants to die. And in fact, that while he was driving, he like lost control, that he just think that he just want to bang to the, wall and just end his life. But through the few weeks that, so happened that, of this GMF courses, I mean, the learning journey, based on what I learned and what I feel, I did share with him as well, the enlightenment and, all these things. It's somehow that it's also sort of open up his mind. And this is why I see that, when you're dying to grow, and after a phase, there is another growth. Then, another things that I realize is that, we live to create value. But if we are nothing, then how much value that we can create? So at the end of the day, that, in order to create more value, that's why the cost of GMF, I'm not thinking about the monetary or like whatever things. It's more to like the inner self that, I now keep saying that, the inner dialogue, dialogue within yourself to release that, the inner potential or whatever value that you might create more in the future. Yeah, this is my enlightenment so far. Thank you so much.
That is excellent. And might I challenge you just a little further? And instead of using the language of create value, what do you think of the language of recognize value?
Recognize value means that the value is already existed.
So for example, yes, I mean, because the value of, say, other people, the value of love, the value of care, these sort of things, they kind of exist, and in many ways trying to create them and force them may be less helpful than to recognize their presence already. And in terms of learning to be present, learning to listen and recognize and to see these values already at play. And I'm not saying that create value is necessarily problematic in all ways, but I would explore thinking along those lines as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
But the idea of keeping them at a level of discomfort is absolutely required. They shouldn't understand everything. They should go back. But I think if we could also help consolidate or tie up a few things, that would be helpful.
Yes, no, that's good, and you're exactly right. There's kind of two more steps to this conversation that I'd like to kind of follow, if possible, to kind of loop back to eventually get back to something that is well, it will lead to something that's more manageable and kind of constrained and focused in a variety of ways. Okay. And before, well, okay. So there's the next phase. So the first phase of the conversation and what I've been pushing you in different ways is a kind of negative phase or a critical phase. It's to think carefully and critically about making space. And the language in the Western tradition has always been dying, but that might not apply in all contexts. Well, sure it doesn't, but there's analogs in all of our kind of intellectual traditions and religious traditions about making space so that one can grow, making space so that one can move forward in a variety of ways. And so there's a clearing away in that negative step, and that's what I've kind of pushed you on in this first hour. And part of that difficulty is, and why in terms of the ordering of the fellowship, this starts at the beginning, because who we are, our identities, who we understand ourselves to be, have been shaped now for at least a couple of decades for you, if not more. And until you're well into your teens, you have no sense of controlling any of that narrative. You are who you are long before you know who you are, in all kinds of ways, culturally and socially and religiously, in all kinds of ways. And this beginning to clear away makes us uncomfortable, because it opens views into ourselves that aren't necessarily as attached to that identity as we may have thought they would always be. And so the first part of the conversation was an attempt to kind of think about that process. And then I want to go back to the comment about recognizing. As we kind of begin to clear away and critically engage who we are in our identities, we find in some ways the possibility for conscience. We find the capacity and the space for compassion that we may or may not have seen in our lives before. And compassion is an external kind of directed action. Conscience is something that happens internally. And so what I want to talk about next is that phase of our kind of emerging identities. If we've talked about clearing away, making space for and recognizing a new identity, what are we finding as we begin to clear that away? The assumption so far in the conversation and our conversation is we're going to find good things. Maybe we aren't. Maybe as we clear away our identities and we begin to kind of challenge preconceived notions of who we ought to be in this world, we find in ourselves things that scare us a little bit, things in our lives and who we are that are not quite so great. And so this is where, and so the next little bit, I want to talk about a little bit recognizing the value of what we find when we begin to clear away parts of our identity and make room for growth. Because I think what we find in ourselves enables us to see things in other people that we wouldn't have seen in others as well. And that becomes then the root of compassion for others. Does that make any sense to you, or do you want me to say more about that? Shens, what do you think? Does that make sense to you?
In a way, yes. So like you say, when you identify something in yourself, you kind of identify something in someone else. But for me, I think it's the other way, you know, like if you identify something in someone else, you actually think back whether, hey, do I have this or do I not have this? And then whether I'm thinking in a good way or bad way. So for me, I think that when I think about compassion, whether I have it or not, I start to see, like, you know, negative parts of myself. So for me, I do like to show compassion, but the bad thing about it is that sometimes some parts of me would kind of want to have gratification, you know, for that, you know. I think that's the bad part of it. But so I just hope to, you know, slowly part ways with so-called gratification.
Good. Well, that's excellent. And my expectation is nobody gets perfect, even, you know, even if you have 60, 80 years to do this. But the simple fact that, and here's where another one of Kierkegaard's thoughts is quite helpful. He says something like recognizes like. And so the simple fact that you can recognize compassion in another means that you have some understanding of compassion and capacity for compassion that enables you to recognize that in other. And so, yes, could we make room for this and cultivate it more deeply in our own lives? Absolutely. But there's a sense in which you can't see in the other what you don't already have in yourself. And that is part and parcel of the difficulty of growth. But that's excellent. Anyone else have any thought? Ray, do you want to add more to the conversation?
Yes, please. One thing, and this is totally personal, but I think I just have to bring it out. Can you hear me?
Yes, sort of.
Okay. So I guess this is something that I just have to share because this is such an avenue. Yeah, something that was so humbling for me was actually loving someone in a very unconventional manner, in the sense of, like, you know, it cannot be something that is fully accepted, at least in our current context. So I find I am actually blessed with friends from LGBTQ community, and then their everyday struggle of, like, of how love is liberating, and it's not just being able to use. So it's not about being able to use someone, becomes so clear to me. It's like how we so easily box them up as if they just want to do it for the sense of gratification, when in fact, no, there's really a choice. And so there's just so much compassion with me after my first deep heartbreak, in terms of a deep love that is, you know, that is other than friendship. So that's compassion for me, to just see that different levels of love, how can we ever judge, as long as that person is loving in the sense of not controlling, but, you know, even hurting for the person that they love. So there's compassion for me in that sense now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Home, did you raise your hand?
Yes. I would like to share that, like, in terms of, like, clearing a space and finding the new identity, that one, like, for me, like, many, like, years ago, more than a decade years ago, like, my identity as Shan, the ethnic identity was so strong. So it was so strong, and it was so rigid, like, the way I associate with the people, the way I take in the information, the way I process, the way I see the thing, all my perspectives are, like, a very narrow, you know, like. So, but, like, from the time that I start to work in social healing, and I could able to, like, giving a space for the other to share their, you know, like, their sufferings, or their not only the suffering, even their agitations or such. And that one gave me, like, the growth of my the other, like, other dimensions of the identity. My identity, my ethnic identity before was get weakened, but I reborn the new identities, the new the new identity that could be able to breach with the otherness. So I just this one just came into my mind. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Aaron, did you want to add something to that?
Okay. Speaking from my experience in building compassion and conscience, it's more of the external factor that made me realize this, rather than looking at it, able to look at it inwardly. So I work with a lot of marginalized people, specifically refugees and migrant workers. Every day, interacting with them, I learn many new things. An example is that yesterday, one Burmese migrant from the Zomi sub ethnicity made me understand or explain to me about how the healthcare issues that are faced by his particular community. So for me, compassion and conscience is a learning process that never ends to actually not just problem solve, but also to create some kind of spiritual flavor in me. That makes sense, Prof. I'm sorry if it went off topic a bit.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And look, all of our journeys are different, right? So that's if anyone wants to social engineer a journey to conscience, you probably ought to be skeptical of that engineering. And I think this is where I have kind of a deep conviction that we have a conscience that will eventually lead us and towards compassion. But each person has an individual journey to get there. And some of us are driven much more internally and reflectively, and some of us are driven much more by our external experiences that shape that open up our eyes internally to see, or to help us see what we're seeing. It seems to me from the few comments that have already been made that most of you learn more and you delve deeper internally as you experience things in the world around you. Is that true for all of you, or are there other ones of you who kind of are driven much more internally and then see things external and then see things in the world around you? Or is it just that your generation just doesn't have an internal life? If newspapers have told me anything, they've told me that's true. Which I'm sure is not right. Amelina, what do you think? How does it work for you?
I think for me, I need something outside to actually trigger what I have inside. So from my sharing, I would like to share, I just married to my husband. So basically his family and my family has a very different, I found a big difference from their kind of raising kids or their kind of lifestyle. So one thing, when we talk about space, I was so used to have a lot of freedom to do whatever what I want, that I can move freely, because my parents, it's not that they don't care, it's just that they give the trust as long as I don't do bad things. So you can go ahead, do whatever you want. You can go study, you can have your own time. And even I don't really have time to mingle around, they don't really take that into heart, I would say. So when it comes to his family, they don't have that kind of, not to say lifestyle. They also well educated. It's just that they are quite restricted to that thing. So I found the space that I need to fight for it. And it took me like around more than months to actually understand their way. And I understand what I'm lacking in myself. It's just that this last week, I actually find that I was reluctant to grow or to actually let my former self die halfway to actually accept the new life. So I think dying to grow is the correct word to hear, since we need to let go something, we need to let go some kind of thoughts before we actually become too selfish, that we need to have a moderate way to adapt people. So one more thing here is about being adaptive and change a bit to have the middle ground.
You make me laugh very, very, very hard here, because there's nothing that tells you who you are like getting married. Oh yeah. There's one other thing: having children. That reveals a lot more about you than you imagine you want, than even you want to ever know about yourself. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's good. Now I'm just thinking about that, and it's going to make me laugh for a long time now. Eric, did you want to talk about yourself a little bit? How do you find growth internally in terms of conscience? Is it through kind of internal reflective, or is it kind of through experiencing others and seeing compassion in others?
I think. Oh, was it me or Heron?
Yes, please.
It's Aaron, not Eric. For me, it's it can be both ways, but for the most part, it'll be looking at the good that I would say great people have done to others. So I learn personally, for me, from my reflections of the past 1 month since joining GMF, I am a more it's more of external motivation that creates I learn quicker through field or practical experience. It's hard. I do not have the tool yet to actually or to create that reflective discourse in myself. Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. Eric, do you want to add something as well?
For myself, I think compassion and consciousness will come in terms of the environment that surrounds us. So, for instance, I'm from Africa, and whenever you talk of Africa, the first thing that will come in people's mind is poverty. That's a fact. In terms of people's mind, even though whether it's 100 decades ago, but it's still there, clicking in people's mind. But so what I'm saying about that my compassion comes through the environment, learning through the environment, is that I found that if I'm not good to others, according to the environment which I was raised up, then I will be lacking support from other people. So it's something that just comes naturally for me. Whenever I see someone suffering, then I have this feeling that whatever little I have, I need to share with this person. And I always feel that people should not suffer when I'm having something extra that I can give. But here comes a problem where sometimes too much compassion, some people take it as an advantage. So we also need to weigh the level of compassion and consciousness that we need to show to other people, in order that you don't give all, or you don't show it all to an extent that somebody will take it as a fight back to you. So mine, in summary, is that my compassion comes with an environment internally and externally. So that's what I can say.
Good, Eric. I'm just gonna follow that up and push you a little further. How do you know when you get to the limits of your compassion? And who sets that limit? And what if I would say, which I won't say, but what if I would say something like, well, you're just being selfish and not willing to, you know, be who you ought to be? What would you say to me?
Yeah, I agree with Eric, but I also think that yes, of course we can give our valid limitations or simplify. We cannot think of ourselves in a vacuum. So, you know, my limited compassion will not end the world, because honestly, we are in community and the relationships would enable us a recharge. So there, I don't think it's an issue that, you know, I will have my limitations, because definitely I will. The limitation is if I were to just think that it's just me, you know, and then that no one else will actually be with me in this journey and would actually be of vital help, like me, like all of us being so unique. Thank you.
That's very good. That's very good.
Hold on, you raised your hand.
Yes, I kind of like agree and also disagree. Like because like when we talk about compassions, and also like sometimes we forget about the self-compassions, right? Like especially when you're dealing with a lots of agitations and sufferings of the others. If you don't have that enough self-compassion to yourself, and if your compassion is not solid, strong enough to face that the big wave of negativity and suffering of the others, that would give a lot of like compassion fatigues, or like a draining to yourself, and also like it has to be so clear that like why do we connect to the others? Why do we want to like how would my compassion serve to the others? So this one has to be very, very clear before we deal with the others, before we are exhausted with our compassions. And the other things I would like to share my reflection is that the external and encountering and the internal process has to go hand in hand. Otherwise, like you become not real, you know, not genuine if you just only focusing on the, you know, like external stimuli, and you keeps on doing and doing and doing. And if you are too much like internally processing without like connecting to the external, the real burning issue, and you just become very philosophically you know, having on this conscience and compassions. The compassions and conscience are what you have to do, what you have to act, right? So yeah, so to me it's like the sense of like the reason I start to get very much interested in the topics and in the area of conscience and compassion is because of the experience that I have experienced externally on like how much like damaging morality, spirituality we have come through. And at the same time, myself like awareness on myself that I don't want to harm to, especially to those who I call enemy, to those who has harmed me. So I don't want to be in the same, like in the same circle to multiply it. So that is the kind of the calling for me. I must take this fellowship. I must look into not only take the fellowship, but to nurture this like conscience and compassions in me. So yeah, I feel that it is very in interdependence and interconnected. Yeah.
That's excellent. And how can I see your hand there, and I'll come to you immediately. And part of what I want to raise here, and what I want you to think about, and Eric, I think I absolutely agree with you, no doubt. But finding what that means for us individually is really, really complicated, especially when the heroes we hold up, people like Mandela, people like Gandhi, people like even Martin Luther King over here in the US, these people were the kind of people who were willing to just give everything until, you know, even if that meant death. And so it's really hard to sort this question out if all of our heroes that we name were willing to just die. And then it's very hard to justify stopping or putting limits on one's compassion as if we think of ourselves in those trajectories. And so, yes, but this is where the messiness of sorting oneself and finding oneself and working with one's own conscience in the context of compassion really is the challenge. But Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, after home, I think home really gave me some clarity on the internal and external, like what we had this learning encounter last week about the mind-based and experience-based. So it sort of like remind me about, you know, mind-based compassion or experience-based compassion. It's like what we think about the compassion, and also what do we experience, how do we experience it? Then this is somehow that, you know, is deepen our compassion limits as well, like you know, like what you mentioned, that who set the limit of the compassion. But because of the right at the beginning of the mind-based, whatever we read, whatever we see, you know, from those who wrote the books, you know, this is based just in our mind. But when we put it into practical, this is where the experience-based take place. Then this is how also that, you know, it's sort of like it make it real in a way that, you know, like like what Holmes say, that the internal encountering and also the external encountering, it when it matches, then it will somehow that, you know, it will deepen our compassions and also our better understanding, I would say. Yeah, thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent. Any other thoughts on this before we jump to the next kind of level of the conversation? Because this is important to pause and to kind of reflect and think and worry about this actually.
Yes, Prof. Martin. Oh, Eric, go first. It's okay.
Okay, Prof. This is just like another question as we reflect on this. Between external and internal compassion, which one lasts longer? So can we like brainstorm on this one?
Well, let's put it this way. I think we're all complicated beings, and I think we are both kind of, for lack of a better way of, we're physical, emotional, and intellectual beings. And I think unless we find some kind of coherence amongst all of that, none of it lasts. None of it lasts very long. But I do think we need all of it for it to last and to do it right. And this is where the next layer of the conversation has to be something like this. And then we'll pick up at whatever threads you want to, but you have to think something like this. In the process of kind of separating, at least temporarily, which you are all doing from the world as we knew it before, and creating space for growth and creating space for seeing new things. In order to go back to the world, you in essence have to go back to, you don't return to the same world, put it that way. You return to the world a different person belonging to, in many ways, a different community. And because we are all for lack of a better term, we are social beings. We are all socially constituted, no matter what we think. We're all shaped by our relationships. We're all shaped by the people we run into at superficial levels and at deep kind of emotional levels. We're all shaped and formed by our relationships with one another. And so, Eric, to go directly to your question, to do it well also requires that recognition and to find then a community that will support that sort of life and will support and feed that kind of compassion. And this is always the unstated part of our heroes in these ways. Martin Luther King, for example, deeply needed a very kind of historical community that he grows out of, but also a contemporary community that was around him and supporting him and carrying him when he couldn't carry himself. And the same goes for Mandela, the same goes for Gandhi, the same goes for Freire. All of these people who we kind of think as heroic individuals all emerge from and lean on and depend on, in an absolute sense, a community that's also oriented the same way. And so this is what I think the genius of this fellowship is that, yes, each of you individually, and many of you will never maybe see each other in person outside of this Zoom context, but what you have is a community that will then serve as, I mean, assuming all goes well and assuming all is well and you don't hate each other by the end of these months, but you have a community that can encourage and feed and support precisely a new engagement with the world. Because the fact of the matter is, you are going to be a different person, and the costs do hurt. There are real costs to changing your life in ways that you can't just pretend I'm tough. They don't bother me. They do. And the money is probably the easiest to deal with because it is real and important, but there's other things that can hurt a lot more. Relationships that you may lose, respect that you may lose, these sort of things, those are real costs that you kind of have to accept in some ways. And the only way that those can be rectified is by the creation of new ones that support a new way of living. And this is why, I mean, in the Christian tradition, for example, monks initially were all individuals running around in the Egyptian desert. And then they realized, man, we can't do this alone. We need one another to do this right. And then monasteries emerged, and then groups of men and women together doing the difficult life together. And other traditions have these as well. And so I think, Eric, the way you have to navigate this moving forward without being prescriptive, because these things you only learn and through practice, is in relation to a community like this that enables it. And that's a very evasive answer, but I think it is the answer. Does that make sense? Aaron, you were going to add more there. Feel free.
Yes, I was just about to say that learning from these exemplary figures, Gandhi, Mandela, and Freire, we all see the strong element of self-preservation. Mandela was locked up for 28 years. How did he survive that? He must have had very strong internal mechanism that actually got him through this. Gandhi had a spiritual background and went on the spiritual path, but did not abandon the external world. Freire had, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he was tied to the social action of the Roman Catholic Church, and yes, all three of them were not the perfect balance, but had the perfect balance for this, but were exemplary balances that we can carry out. And speaking about the U.S. context, Martin Luther King Jr. He was, if I'm not mistaken, he was a Baptist minister. So they all had this balance in which they carry out. I would just like to explain that, and the more hip and cool word for self-preservation is what millennials call these days is self-care and self-love, which is also self-compassion. That's all, Professor.
Excellent. And people in the academy use resilience now, which may not be the best way to narrate that. But no, that's very good. So I want to talk, maybe we should take another 5-minute break. But I want to talk then about social action, moving from compassion in an abstract sense to a kind of a concrete sense and a collective sense, with the kind of the trajectories we've already mentioned. But one thing I want to talk about before we're done, and this kind of closes the loop back around to where we started, is let's say positive social action, or in terms of the folks we know, the Gandhis, the Mandelas, the Ferreras. These folks become famous not because they're the only ones who have compassion, and not because they're the only ones who are articulate, but they become famous and kind of models because they're at the right place in the right time and they're the right kind of person that becomes something bigger than them. And so I want to then push this conversation a little bit further, because from what I can tell, and you wouldn't be here in this conversation if you weren't, but you're the kind of people who care for other people, and you want to do good in the world, and that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that means, what that looks like. And so what we have in our world today is, let's say, for example, you may or may not be familiar with these to some extent, but the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for example. These are goals that the United Nations has set for the next decade or so, give or take, high priority things that the world ought to engage and ought to fix, things that are wrong with the world. And so they have all kinds of meetings and agendas to kind of meet these sustainable development goals, all of which are good things. But that's not how Gandhi or Mandela or Martin Luther King or Ferrari worked. How they worked was moving through this process in coming to this kind of openness to the other and openness to kind of recognizing the other, such that the other, in all of these cases, poor or marginalized or underrepresented groups, provided the energy and provided the direction for the compassion. And I take that to be a very different kind of process than something that is intentionally engineered with a particular goal in mind ahead of time. So for example, and that's part of why, and maybe it's to Nat's frustration, but that's why in many cases, I'm much more willing to have conversations like this in a non-directive kind of manner, where I'm happy for you to take the conversation where you want to go, because ultimately, in my mind, my philosophy of this conversation, these things are, well, that's where it ought to go. And I do wonder, and I do want to push you then to think about, positive social action in similar ways. So as we kind of, and for academics, and this is just an aside to make fun of myself and people like me in the academic world, we like nothing more than to have the answers. And second thing we like to do is we like to share those answers with other people. And we like to be important as we share those answers. And I think most of what compassion looks like is letting other people have the answers and letting other people ask the questions. And so, and part of this in the kind of liberation trajectory of the Christian tradition, when one talks about kind of the ontological priority of the poor, or a perspective where folks who are marginalized and poor generally see how our society really works much better than those people who benefit from the society. Because those of us who benefit from society kind of hide and try to ignore the real effects that our society has. And so as we kind of begin this kind of process of clearing the ground to grow and listening to our conscience and listening to other people, my sense is, and I want to get your feedback on this, as we begin to make that concrete, as we begin to implement that sort of compassion, our self-interest can really sneak in here, so that what we think is compassion can end up being very easily, for all very good reasons, kind of my project, or things that, or my agenda. And I think the kinds of people that we celebrate, like King, Gandhi, Freire, Mandela, what they all recognized is it can't be mine to control. What you can do is give voice to it. What you can do is articulate it. What you can do is support it, encourage it. But the moment you try to control it, in my mind, you're no longer acting with compassion, but you're acting out of control. And if you're in any relationship you've ever been in, you know immediately when that line is crossed. And you just recognize it. And all the good can be destroyed super fast in a small step in this direction. And so those of you who are wrestling with kind of becoming the people you ought to be, as you kind of learn to listen to your conscience and learn to see other people in new ways and listen to other people, I want to kind of ask you to share, if you can, if you're willing, how you implement that passion or that compassion in socially without it becoming another mode of maximizing benefits for myself and others that becomes a mere economic exchange that then becomes part of our broader society that we can, benefit from. What is your experience here, and help us collectively to think about how implementing positive action in a way that doesn't return us to the center of the conversation?
Yeah, may I share?
Please.
Ms. Marnie. Yeah. I've seen that dynamics also within myself, Professor Paul, that interest for self-gratification, for validation. And I've realized that once I thought about more what I did for the community rather than what the community did for me, meaning their impact on my life. That's the reason also sometimes, or most often, I get so tired of the work that I am doing, because I'm really more focused with the results or even what I actually am doing for the community. And I've seen that dynamics. And I think it was last year that I realized that compassion is something very, very natural for everybody. So very natural in me. But our way of expressing compassion may be very different. And since I grapple with that struggle of wanting for self-gratification, for validation, and for recognition, I realized that my way of being selfless in terms of expressing compassion would be to do it on a personal, one-on-one ways or actions towards a particular person. And it's not really so much with a community, but really with with certain people, with specific people, and I get to listen to their stories, and I learn from their stories, and I get to share their stories. So that's my way of looking at my dynamics of showing compassion, without being so enticed and driven by what others have to say about me, what recognition I will get. So I would go for very personal means and actions, like really immersing in their lives, listening to their stories. So that's the dynamics I've seen in myself. Yeah, so that's for me.
Excellent, Marty. Thanks for sharing that. That's wonderful. Anyone else?
I could go. All right. Uh, um, Coming from the NGO world, there are projects, there are funders, there are objectives, clear-cut, quantifiable achievements. And then like I handle relationships, partnerships, and I get this conflicting feeling that if if efficiency, and I'm thankful leadership is not like that, but then there are times, you know, the pressure, and I'm very much a field work, I'm very much a field worker. So I could feel at times them knowing the numbers more, them knowing that, you know, we have to justify that we deserve the funding, that that we're doing good. I could feel the certain need at times to be efficient, which is right, because you want to make sure that, you know, good things do happen efficiently. But at the same time, it's really more than that, especially if we handle, if no, see, even handling is a bad word. I mean, a disturbing word. If we engage communities that are from marginalized sectors, I mean, like everyone else, and especially more so, they have been victims of our utilitarian systems, you know, systems that give value only when you use something, and when you get the use of something, when you get paid from that. And so what I do, despite of course me a lot more, is that I really value what they give me, in the sense of like, if they refer me to another community, a partnership, I put in value in that relationship as well. I also, if they give me time, like a lot of, you know, just like really checking in, we call that, but slang here is like chica, you know, chica, possibly it's familiar to you. So chica, you know, like light talk and what. I do my best to listen, because at the end, they are not just numbers that I have. I'm really thankful that one way or the other, the relationships do stay far beyond certain periods of quietness. So there, I just think it's about just being present. Otherwise, you know, we tend to think that we're the heroines or the heroes, which actually led to being marginalized to begin with, because other people thought that what they were doing against them was the right thing.
Ray, thank you. Thank you. No, and you know, the NGO world and the charity world can become big business very fast. And then it becomes exactly what it's meant not to be. Aaron, would you say your experiences, how have you navigated your experiences in this way?
Yes, from my experience, I would say it is between being allergic, at the same time also not being superior to others. I mean this in as the way I work with people, or I treat people in my work. And at the other level, there is ethical and political ethical issue of geopolitics at play. A lot of this funding does propel the interests of some powers, directly or indirectly. So at some points, I do only focus in the purpose of assisting those assisting and working together with those communities, and also be aware or be open that yes, the funding or the assistance given does have strings attached. Yeah, but at most times I maximize the empowerment part of it. Yeah, I try to make the program as naturally as possible rather than being fund driven. Yeah, that is I would say the dilemma that I constantly have.
Yeah, I hear that. Excellent.
Yes. When Professor Paul said like compassions in social actions, and I realized that even like what is really a compassion is, and it's still me, and still I'm so confused. Still I don't really get it. Like I feel that to generalize because like in the two countries that I came from, like Myanmar and Sri Lanka, the words like compassions and conscience are really overused and misused in terms of like we don't really like it is too overused. Just one example in Sri Lanka, the soldier the government armies are trained in a way that, like, since it is a majority Buddhist country, so in the morning before they go to war, and they recite the 5 precepts, right? I will not kill, I will not, so these things, and then they try to embody themselves that, whatever they do is the act of like compassion toward their people, right? And then when they send out to the war, and like the real story was like that. The soldier, like when he was about to shoot the other, like the enemy that they say, at the time when the mosquito come and land on him, and he would just blow it away because he is so compassionate, and because he won't even kill the mosquito, but he's so ready to kill the otherness, the other people. So I would say that like the compassions like are so narrow and so conditional, and yeah, it is not like unconditional compassion. It is not like inclusiveness are not there. So the same way happened in Myanmar as well. Like many monks are teachings and teaching us a lot about compassions, but like that, those compassion never put it into the social justice. So for me personally, I'm still looking for what is really compassions being into the social actions. What does it really?
That is excellent. That is a wonderful kind of commentary on how even these even our best impulses can be trivialized and commodified in certain ways. Compassion, in terms of the definition, I mean, in going back to where the word comes from, it simply just means passion with. Calm is together, and passion is, well, passion. And so passion for the other is essentially kind of a simple way of seeing a root meaning of compassion. And the other in compassion is any other. It can't be a selective other. And so there's a sense in which compassion, if it is rightly called compassion, has to be for those like us and those very much unlike us, those who are our friends and those who are our enemies. And if one doesn't have a disposition of care or passion for all of those people, one has a very truncated understanding of what compassion ought to be. That's a very simple way, a simple way to articulate it. And the difficulty is finding ways in which, and finding examples of people who really are willing to share passion with, share share desires with those who are very much unlike them. That's the most difficult thing politically. Is very unpopular, but it's also very difficult socially and culturally, because it requires you to step out of kind of the comfort zones that we all grow up in. And this is why, to loop back to the conversation we started with, there are ways in which one has to, it sounds dramatic, but one has to put to death the comforts of one's life in order to really experience and demonstrate compassion, because it is super uncomfortable if you're not willing to give up. I mean, it's impossible if you're not willing to give up certain ways of thinking that we're all born with and certain comforts that we come with. And it's the kind of life that is very tenuous because you don't really belong anywhere. Your family might say, if you, well, I mean, your family might reject you for marrying the wrong person, let alone giving your life to help people who they don't like. Your friends might, ostracize you, and you may not belong anymore to your culture in the way you did, but you're certainly also not going to belong to the culture that you are trying, or the group or whatever, the other folks who you're trying to help. And so there is a very real sense in which compassion requires a kind of life that does hold the world lightly in order to hold the world firmly. And this is why we started with the dying part of the dying to the world conversation, because I think you can only get to the willingness and the ability to hold things firmly on their own terms, and to love things on their own terms once you're willing to hold a lot of things that we come with as baggage very lightly and be willing to give those things up. And that's a super uncomfortable place to be, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But again, it's helpful to kind of think through the steps that get us there, and to think through what it means so that we can begin to accept that and embrace that as a kind of existence, rather than an anomaly that we shouldn't be existing in. Is that fair? Does that make any sense? Any other thoughts about your own experiences in kind of relating compassion or expressing compassion as social or political action? Because I take that to be one of the biggest challenges that we face today. Ray, go ahead.
Yes, it's a simple point. One of like the best definitions that got me questioning and then looking deeper into compassion is that an additional definition, right, Prof, would be that compassion, like passion, which is also to suffer. So it's really very much accepting the suffering that comes with the existence with the person. So which why I see it romantically in the sense of like, it's much more than, the good things. It's really the whole thing, the whole loving thing, regardless of everything. To me, is compassion.
Yes, and compassion in terms of suffering with is also an expression of it. That's very good. That's very good. So Eric, I'm going to come back to you now. Earlier you said, and in a very right way, you have to limit your compassion. What more would you want to say about that? Or would you want to qualify that or specify that at this point? I'm just giving you a hard time because, but I do really want to hear what you have to say here.
Okay, when I mentioned that you have to see how to limit the limit of your compassion, let's say, for example, there's different types of these things, like we have toxic empathy, right?
Yep.
With toxic compassion, and toxic compassion in a way that somebody is doing something and taking advantage of its exchange to find cloud chasing, And this, if we relate it to the social compassion now. So this will sometimes, this is where I said that you limit your compassion level in such a way that people won't see it as taking advantage to other person in order to gain something else. Not that you are being selfish to give in. So that was my concept of it. Not turning the compassion to a toxic compassion or a dictatorial compassion in such a way that we talk of, I need to see the gratification on whatever I've done to you. So that is where the limitation of the compassion, you just need to be careful of who are these people, what kind of a person are you being sympathetic to? Maybe you are being sympathetic to, I'm sorry to say, but maybe you're being sympathetic to, maybe you find a sexual worker on the street. Then you gather all those kind of people, then you just show your expression and compassion to them. And then, you know, the world is full of paparazzi. Then people will be just like taking the pictures and all that. Then you all of a sudden trending on a negative way, but your intentions were positive way. So that is where the limit part I was explaining, not that you're being selfish to what you have to other people. And then you are talking of self-gratification. There's something we call, I think is in the Bible. I'm not reading the Bible every day. You will you'll excuse me for this, but it's written that what the right hand gives, the left hand should not know. But is it the case nowadays with all the compassion that we are doing also? Because the world has turned into self-gratification and the accountability in terms of social. Expose it to the social media. I want other people to see it, that Eric was doing this to Asian guy, Eric was doing this to that poor woman. So you find that we are mixed up, and we are trying to come out of this conundrum of making things, every little thing that we are doing it with good intention, but the actions we are taking to justify it is what make it look so bad. So that's what I was saying, limit your ways and means of doing something good. So I think you get my point now. Thank you.
Oh, Eric, I got it at the beginning. I love it. You said it better than I could have. And I mean, if anybody can speak on behalf of the problematic nature of expressing, using other people to cultivate one's virtue, it's Africa. Because Africa has been the way in which North America and Europe have cultivated their virtues for centuries. And you're exactly right. You're exactly right about all of that. That is, you wonderfully said. And that's the other warning that I want to kind of register, and that's why I kind of wanted you to say more about this, is that as we cultivate our conscience, our compassion ought to express not so much, it ought to be not so much a means of making ourselves better, but a means of making the other better. And it's only in making the other better that we actually cultivate our own identity in the right ways. And I think one can get that backwards so quickly. And then we're back to needing to clear out some ground again, and cultivating and pruning some things so that we can grow further. And that's wonderful, Eric. Thank you. Kamala, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, I mean, I'm enjoying the session so much. Thank you so much. But I wanted to ask, like, is compassion always being about kind to others, or is it also about kind to myself? Because sometimes I have this hard time. I really want to be compassionate to others, but then the cost for me is too heavy that I suffer a lot, honestly. And I have to really go through this therapy to myself that, girl, you know, like, this is not what you can do, and then stop it here. So it's very confusing to me. Is it only to others, and is it not about myself?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would say it's different, but only kind of in terms of the word. And compassion by definition entails in a relationship to somebody else. So maybe we use the language of care. Now there is a real need for self-care that one can't ignore, and cultivating care for oneself, and it's only in this kind of cultivating oneself that one can actually be useful to another. Absolutely. And so so I would affirm your instinct here in every possible way. What I would probably say is compassion might not be the word for that, but care is a much more generic term and a much richer term in some sense that gives us a way to talk about that. And that dialectic between care for oneself and care for the other is incredibly fraught. And there's no answer to that other than in one's own experience and one's own, and kind of as one kind of begins to understand oneself. And you need friends you trust to help you with that, because you can lose yourself in the other, or you can become so bitter and self-absorbed very quickly that you need other people to tell you and help you with that, but also to kind of kick you in the butt when it's like, well, you're just now being lazy. and because we all get into situations where we're maybe not the best judge of ourselves.
Right.
And I think what I strongly encourage you, and what Nat's genius here is, you are a cohort, and I'm sure you have other people in your life you trust as well. Use those people to do this for you, because once you're in a situation where you can't make those decisions yourself, you need others. Is that fair? Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it is. Thank you. I think Home has something to say.
Yes, I would like to reflect on the points that Camilla mentions, like in the Tibetan traditions, we have like a soft compassions and like hard compassions, right? For example, like at home, I have a 1-year-old. Like, for example, the 1-year-old child is going to swallow the coin or going to touch the fire. Definitely, I will just, oh, son, don't do that. And I won't be so, like I would grab him, or I would beat his hand or something, right? So the compassion sometimes, like, also we can reflect in a way that our like parents or mentors sometimes treat to us might be hard at the time, but it is really hard compassions, right? And also when we talk about social actions, like when we put compassions into the social action, it is not just patting the back all the time. Sometimes you take the tough decisions, you make a tough actions. That is also compassion, right? And then one more thing I want to share is that, like, a few months ago, we have a collective group. We did a journaling on self-compassion. The prompt was like your mentor or the person who loves you write a letter to you. So we have to imagine ourselves in the shoes of that mentor or the person who knows us and loves us a lot. And so by writing that journal, and I find out 2 points. The first point was like, compassion is, the first cycle of the compassion is like really seeing, like a comforting, caring, understanding, really soft part, right? But from there, what it is evolved is that, like I start to see a lot in my journaling, I start to see a lot what I could be, my potential come out from this, right? So there I started to see, like, how about compassion to those that I don't like, right? To those has harmed me. So in this case, when I see, like, not only understanding the suffering or the agitations or trauma of that person going through, but at the same time, how that person can come up to be the potential, the potential of that person can come up if the condition give. Then we have a willing to to be service or to change that condition, to nurture that person to grow, or to nurture that community to grow, then there the conscience come. So like by having like a strong morality and very firm morality, very firm conscience, you could able to help the others to stop the violence, to stop, to reduce the violence. So this is also out of compassion. So I would like to share this, please.
That's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. And so, I mean, this is where, like I said, when we first met seems like almost a year ago, but maybe a month or two ago, 6 weeks ago, give or take, you all who are participating in this have incredible resources, and in many ways, you will teach each other in the short term and in the long term more than any one of us could. And I think that what I wanted to have in this conversation is because the diversity of who you are and your practical interests are quite different, we have been a little more abstract talking about some of these themes. But I do think that the trajectories and the kind of themes that I've tried to illuminate today, both kind of clearing the way to step into an uncomfortable or step out of one's place in society is necessary, and the difficulties that entails in order to see oneself in a new way and to see others in a new way. And then as you kind of emerge back in the world, in a world of compassion, always be aware that the temptation to fall back into the kinds of patterns that are present in the world are always there. And so there's a continual movement as we evolve and grow. And you have all kind of illustrated this in different ways in a wonderful way. The beautiful thing I want you to just also note, and I want to tip a hat to Nat here, is that you can see in terms of the humility and the generosity of this process, Nat is also not prearranging all these things in a sense that to get where he wants you to go, but he's allowing people like me and others who Nat was generously recognizing that this process can go in a variety of ways, and the questions that other people have may be useful to some of you and may not be useful to all of you, and letting you become your best version of you through a complicated and convoluted process that I don't think anybody quite has predetermined outcomes, other than you're going to be different people than when you came in. And I think Nat's structuring of this in a way that allows contributions and conversations that are beyond kind of his own kind of possibility is just an excellent example of letting the action, the positive social action out of one's control. And that takes a lot of self-discipline to let things go ways that maybe wouldn't go. So I want to just nod to Nat and think that's, I mean, I'm incredibly grateful to be part of this conversation. And I just think the fact that it's possible in this way is indebted to kind of Nat's maturity on some of these things. And so it's midnight here. I'm happy to conclude by saying something like this. I am more than happy to talk in more detail about any particular sorts of things any of you want, but I'm not going to hunt you down and ask you questions like I'm free to do on Zoom like this. And Aaron and Eric, I'm gonna keep laughing about confusing your names all the time. But you are in good hands, and I am incredibly excited about what's possible and where you all end up, not only in the next couple of months, but in the next few years. So I want to just conclude. What I want to say is an expression of gratitude. Thank you to Nat and all of you for letting me be part of this conversation and giving me more time and attention than probably I deserve. It's been enriching for me, and I hope it's useful for all of you as well. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to Nat and Nirmal and say thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a nice encounter. You taking us through dying to live to a compassionate, or the presence of compassion in social action. I think it was, and it's quite a kind of conversational, and that's I think a wonderful thing. Of course, some around as we moved along, there was some difficulty and some difficulty of where this was going. But I think that's the process. The process cannot be determined, perfectly, and that everybody understands at one go everything that is being part of the conversation. So I mean, we have different ways we receive it. So I think, but I think, the concluding part gives us an idea of where this was going, where this can grow into as we listen to the other persons who will be coming to share their experience with us. So thank you so much, Paul. I think we will certainly call you back. And when we move to the second part of this whole journey, which is going to be on compassion, I'm sure you can come back to share more aspects on this compassion. But also, as I think I've shared with you, one of the important things for the student, for these fellows, is that they have to build their own networks and friends. And I hope they will become your friend too, and they will reach out to you and have chat. So they should have now, or they should feel that now they have in their network somebody called Paul Martin, whom they can reach out to in Texas, who's willing to stay up till midnight to talk to them. So this friendship needs to grow, and I think that if nothing happens, at least you have a new friend here. Okay. So thank you so much.
Nat, thank you. I would be honored for any of you to talk further about any of this. So just thank you very much, Nat.
Thank you. Yes.
Paul, we'll have a short chat before we close. So you can go and sleep now peacefully.
Yes, I think we should let Professor Paul to sleep also.
Good night.
Well, thank you very much, y'all. Have a great day.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for leaving us with a lot of
Thank
questions.
you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Bye.
Okay. I just received some news, some WhatsApp or some messages that this has been a little difficult to begin with, but I think we were delving into some difficult areas. So you can expect this kind of variation. This conversation scapes are not the same. It was maybe more direct when Professor Jinan shared. Here you had to go through a discussive process, conversation process of going through 3 stages. So just flow with it, and as Paul suggested, and as the others will come to suggest, there is no end we are going towards except the end that you create through these conversations, through these learnings, which is combining your experience, the experience of an educator, the experience of this growing community. So then you build your own paths, So I think that is something which is very important as part of this learning journey, and that is why we call it a journey. So if you have been uncomfortable, you're not sure what was happening, or you was in some areas not clear, you could, if you had notes, if you wanted to know what Plato say, or what is the other person is
Soren Kirkegaard.
Huh?
Soren Kirkegaard.
Soren Kirkegaard. Kierkegaard. If you want to know who this European philosophers have been have contributed, you may just look up. The simplest thing is to look the Wikipedia, but otherwise, if you are interested, you can read it. This, of course, Paul comes from a Christian tradition, so he shared something on that, but he did not structure it as a Christian experience, but a general experience. So I think this is how we will also have people coming and sharing their life with you. So if you're uncomfortable, just as Professor Jinan said, be in that state. Okay, that's a required state for these 3 months. and much longer as things, as you delve into these questions and these things that you want to find out through your experience and not just listening to people or reading something, through your own experience. Now, until you get that closure, just keep the discomfort, because the closure will come when you experience and you get that insight. Oh, this is it. This is the reason. And then there will be a closure, and you will find the answers to what you're looking for. Your own answers, not mine, not Professor Paul's, not Jinan's, your own answers as you keep this constant discomfort and then find a closure through an experience or through another encounter. So I think keep that going, keep the discomfort going, get out of this thing. And of course, he's introduced a new idea of is a more serious form of letting go, dying to live. So, maybe dying to create more space for ourselves. And that may be something which you need to think about in the first one question, whether you really are talking to the world or talking to your text, your words. Now here, he's saying that you have to experience the world, to open up spaces, you have to die. And this is a metaphorical death, not the physical death he's talking about, though physical death also does some things like that, but a metaphorical death. And that death creates space. So everyone is talking about ways in which you need to connect, you need to open up, you need to experience this inner nurturing or growing. So just keep those lessons in place, and you will see the connections between the